In the middle of the corridor of an elite clinic stood Vera, the cleaning lady. In her arms, wrapped in a simple hospital blanket, lay a newborn baby, who for the first time in 3 days had stopped crying. Around her, a reverent silence settled. "He's quieting down," whispered a young nurse, unable to believe her eyes. "Look, he's really quieting down." That silence was suddenly broken by a low, icy voice that made everyone flinch. "Who are you?" The owner of the corporation, Mr. Davis, stood leaning against the wall. His expensive suit was disheveled, and his gaze was fixed on the woman who dared to hold his son. "And what are you doing with my child?" For 3 days, that wailing had been the soundtrack of her work. Vera heard it while mopping floors, taking out the trash, and hiding in the supply room. The cries of the millionaire's son had become torture for the entire staff, but for Vera they were something more. A persistent, agonizing call that awakened something long forgotten inside her. She had seen the doctor's despair and the father's raw fury. He seemed ready to destroy everything around him. Remembering her recent reprimand and the strict rule forbidding any contact with patients, she fought with herself. But today, when she saw the exhausted nurse on the verge of tears, Vera broke all the rules. She approached quietly and said only one sentence: "Let me try." In complete helplessness, they handed her the baby. Irritated, Mr. Davis waved his hand at the nurse and turned back to the window. But out of the corner of his eye, he noticed movement in the hallway. He strode quickly to the door and flung it open. Vera, frozen with a mop in her hand just a few meters from the room, startled and dropped it. The mop clattered dully against the tiled floor. "What are you doing here?" he said coldly, casting her a look of disdain. "Eavesdropping?" "No, sir, I'm just cleaning the corridor." "It's my job," Vera stammered, quickly picking up the mop. "Your job is to be invisible and silent," Mr. Davis said sharply, stepping toward her. "And right now you're in the way. This floor is supposed to be empty. Leave immediately." "Yes, of course, I'm sorry, sir," Vera murmured without raising her eyes. She hurriedly turned her cleaning cart and almost ran around the corner. But even there, far away, the baby's piercing cries still followed her, filling her with a painful sense of helplessness. The next day the crying didn't stop. It became the background noise of the entire wing, irritating and all-consuming. Vera carefully avoided the corridor leading to Davis's suite, doing her work in the far rooms. In a small supply closet cluttered with bottles of cleaning products, she was changing the water in her bucket when the door creaked open. Mark, an elderly technician with tired but kind eyes, walked in. He was one of the few people Vera occasionally exchanged a few words with. "Heard the news?" he asked, leaning against the wall. "They say our millionaire is threatening to sue the clinic. Neither he nor the baby has slept for 2 nights. "I heard the crying," Vera said softly, wringing out her rag. "I feel so sorry for the baby." "Yeah, poor kid," Mark sighed. "But you, Vera, stay away from that room. That Davis yelled at a nurse yesterday so bad she cried in the bathroom afterward. Give him a reason, and he'll make one of us the scapegoat. You remember your reprimand, don't you?" Vera nodded, her shoulders sinking even lower. Mark's words were reasonable. She needed to think about her job, about keeping it. But somewhere deep inside her, a quiet protest was growing. How could she just ignore the suffering of a tiny, helpless being? Later, pushing her cleaning cart down the corridor, she deliberately chose the longer route, one that happened to pass by Mr. Davis's suite. She kept close to the opposite wall, trying not to look toward the door, yet her steps slowed of their own accord. At that moment, a tall, silver-haired man in a perfectly pressed white coat entered the room, the clinic's chief physician, Dr. Peterson. Mr. Davis stood with his back to him, but the tension in his posture spoke for itself. That evening, during her second shift, Vera was cleaning the staff lounge. The door was slightly ajar, and through it came the muffled voices of 2 young nurses. "I can't take it anymore," one of them complained. "That crying, it's in my head even when I go home. And the father, he's like a wild animal trapped in a cage." "What do you expect?" replied the second nurse. "The baby's vitals are perfect. We've run every possible test. Allergies, colic, neurology, everything. He's completely healthy. Even Dr. Peterson doesn't know what to do. It's some kind of unexplainable case. They say the mother's in critical condition after childbirth. Maybe the baby feels it, the first nurse suggested softly. That bit of information struck Vera deeply. The child was healthy, which meant the cause of his suffering wasn't physical pain. She felt again that long-forgotten twinge of intuition, a memory of her grandmother's words. When a baby cries like that, it's the soul that hurts, not the body. Late that night, when the floor was almost empty, Vera once again found herself in that same corridor. Through the large glass window in the door, she saw Mr. Davis. He was sitting in a chair, holding his screaming son in his arms. He looked utterly broken. His jacket was off, his tie loosened, and his face showed a mix of anger and complete despair. He rocked the baby awkwardly, his movements sharp and tense. In that moment there was nothing left of the powerful millionaire, only a desperate father. Then Vera noticed something. For just a second, the baby quieted when a laundry cart rolled softly past the room, its wheels making a low, rhythmic creak. That brief pause, that tiny reaction to a gentle, steady sound, made her heart stop. The next morning, a medical council gathered in the ward. Chief Physician Dr. Peterson stood at the bedside, holding a thin folder of test results. His voice was calm and measured as he addressed Mr. Davis. The head nurse stood by the wall, afraid to move. "Mr. Davis," the doctor began, "we have conducted a full range of examinations, including the most advanced diagnostic tests. I can say with absolute confidence that your son is physically completely healthy. There are no medical reasons for his condition. No pathologies, no abnormalities." Mr. Davis slowly raised his heavy, bloodshot eyes, the eyes of a man who hadn't slept in days. "So you're telling me," he said in a low, dangerous voice, "that my son has been screaming nonstop for no reason at all? Do you take me for an idiot, doctor?" "Of course not, sir," Dr. Peterson replied evenly. "I'm simply stating a medical fact. Sometimes newborns have similar reactions. It may be due to adaptation to the new environment, or heightened sensitivity of the nervous system." "Enough of this nonsense," Davis exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "I'm paying this clinic a fortune not to listen to your guesses. You're either incompetent or hiding something from me. And I'll make sure this hospital's reputation is destroyed." "We understand your desperation, Mr. Davis," the doctor continued, maintaining his composure. "As an alternative, we could invite a sleep consultant, a specialist in what's called white noise therapy. Sometimes it helps infants calm down." "Are you mocking me?" Davis barked out a short, bitter laugh. "Find me a doctor, not a charlatan." The meeting ended inconclusively. Vera, who was cleaning the procedure room across the hall, saw Davis storm out, followed by the weary Dr. Peterson. A little later she heard him tell the head nurse in a low voice in the corridor, "We've reached an impasse. Medicine is powerless here. Just make sure the baby doesn't become dehydrated." Left alone, Mr. Davis began to pace the corridor like a caged tiger. He pulled out his phone and started striding furiously back and forth, barking orders into the receiver. Vera happened to be scheduled to mop this section of the hallway at that moment. Curling into herself, she tried to be as invisible as possible, pushing her mop along the wall. "I don't care how much it costs," Davis's voice boomed down the corridor. "Find me the best pediatrician in the world, in Europe, in Asia, wherever. I want him here tomorrow. Charter a private plane, buy an entire clinic, do whatever it takes, but have a person here tomorrow who can help my son." Vera listened to those desperate commands and understood something simple. This powerful man was used to buying everything with money: airplanes, clinics, the best specialists. But he had run up against what money could not buy: silence and peace for his own child. The next day the tension in the clinic reached a breaking point. It seemed the very air was soaked with despair. Vera felt two utterly opposite emotions fighting inside her: a primal fear of losing her job and an almost maternal instinct demanding immediate intervention. During her lunch break she sat in the farthest corner of the supply room, trying to eat her meager meal, but nothing would go down. The baby's crying reached even here, dull and persistent like a toothache. The door opened again and Mark stepped in, carrying a steaming mug of coffee and looking more exhausted than usual. He sat opposite Vera in silence and took a long sip. "You're not yourself," he finally said, watching her closely. "Still thinking about that baby?" Vera slowly nodded without lifting her eyes from her food container. I can't stop thinking about him. He's so small, Mark. He shouldn't suffer like this. No one should. The technician agreed. But it's not our war, Vera. Understand that already. We're small people, Vera. Our job is to fix pipes, mop floors, and get paid enough to survive. That's it. But if no one can help him, she almost whispered, the doctors have given up. That Mr. Davis could buy the whole world, but it's useless. And you really think, Mark said with a weary half-smile, that a cleaning lady with a rag can do what doctors with fancy diplomas can't? There was no mockery in his tone, only bitter irony. Vera, listen to me. I've worked in places like this for 20 years. I've seen men like Davis hundreds of times. To them, people like us aren't people at all. We're furniture. Functions. If you make one wrong move, he'll crush you without even noticing. The clinic's administration will take his side. He pays them millions. They'll throw you out the same day and no one will even remember your name. I know, Vera said softly. You're right, of course you're right. I'm scared. So scared. Good, Mark pressed on. Be scared. Fear keeps us alive. You've got debts, bills to pay. You can't afford to risk everything for what? A passing moment of pity? Believe me, the world won't change because of it. You'll just become one more unemployed nobody. He finished his coffee and stood up. Just be careful, okay? Don't go looking for trouble. His words were a cold shower that froze her impulse to act. She sat alone in the deafening silence of the storage room after he left. He was right about everything. Absolutely everything. She was no one, a shadow, a replaceable cog. Any initiative would be seen as disobedience, as something foolish and out of place. She finished her lunch and went back to work, forcing herself to think only about clean tiles and streak-free mirrors. But that evening, as her shift neared its end, she saw something that changed everything again. A young nurse, trying to calm the baby, turned on a special device that emitted white noise. A soft, monotonous hiss filled the room. For a few seconds, the baby actually went quiet, and the nurse smiled in relief. But then his tiny face crumpled again, and he began to cry even louder, with such despair it was as if the artificial sound caused him pain. Vera watched, and a sudden certainty crystallized in her mind. They were doing everything wrong. They were trying to drown out his cries, when what they needed was to hear his silence. On her way home, she walked slowly, lost in thought. The city roared and glittered with lights, full of life, but Vera noticed none of it. Passing a baby store, she stopped. Behind the glass, in cozy little cribs, lay mannequin infants. Next to them stood a mannequin mother, leaning over one of them with a gentle, frozen smile. That simple commercial display hit her like a blow. She remembered her village, her youth, the warm evenings, the quiet songs that could calm any storm. It wasn't superstition. It was a connection, one no medical instrument could measure. When she reached her tiny rented room on the edge of the city, she sat on her bed and, almost without realizing it, began to hum softly. It was one of those old lullabies, the simplest, the oldest of them all. The melody flowed on its own, and for the first time in many days, Vera felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. She didn't know what she was going to do, only that she could no longer stand by and do nothing. Night descended over the clinic like a heavy velvet shroud, but it brought neither peace nor rest. On the contrary, the silence in the sterile, dimly lit corridors felt thick and strained, ready to burst at any moment from a single sound. That sound, of course, did not stop. The crying from the luxury suite on the 7th floor had become a part of the building's nightly vigil. Its metronome, its raw, exposed nerve. The wailing seeped through heavy doors, bounced off tiled walls, and crawled through the ventilation shafts, creeping into every corner of the floor like a poisonous fog. Vera was finishing her shift, her whole body weighed down by leaden exhaustion. Her back throbbed from endless bending, her shoulders ached from the monotonous motion of the mop, and in her ears lingered the ghostly echo of the baby's cry, a sound that seemed to have embedded itself deep into her skull, vibrating there even when she covered her ears. She washed the floors in the last, longest corridor, polished the matte steel door handles until they gleamed, as if trying to find salvation in this simple, methodical action from the chaos raging just a few dozen meters away. Now, slowly pushing her squeaky cart, she headed toward the supply room. her small refuge where she could finally change and step out into the vast, humming silence of the night city, where the baby's cries would dissolve into the noise of cars and wind. Her path inevitably led past the night nurse's station. Behind the tall counter, in the circle of light cast by a desk lamp, sat a very young girl, her head resting on her crossed arms. Her shoulders trembled slightly. Vera recognized her immediately, Laura, the trainee nurse she'd seen the day before. The one who had desperately tried to soothe baby Davis with that white noise device, only to fail miserably. Quietly, trying not to make a sound, Vera stopped her cart in the shadow behind a tall potted palm. One of the wheels squeaked treacherously, like a mouse's tiny cry. Laura flinched at the sound and lifted her head sharply. Her face, usually fresh and rosy, was now pale and hollow, her eyes swollen and red from restrained tears and sleepless nights. "Tough night?" Vera asked softly, almost in a whisper. Her voice was barely audible beneath the constant crying, which, here by the suite, sounded even louder, sharper, almost physically drilling into her ears. Laura exhaled shakily, as if Vera's question had broken through the dam of her composure. "You have no idea," she whispered, rubbing her temples as if to ease a pounding headache. "It's hell. Never-ending hell. He doesn't stop crying. Not for a second. I think I'm going insane. That crying, it follows me even in my sleep. I come home, lie down, and I still hear it in my head." Vera nodded sympathetically, taking a few steps closer to the counter. She knew that feeling all too well. "And the father? Mr. Davis?" "Oh, Mr. Davis." Laura lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, glancing toward the dark hallway leading to the suite, as if afraid he might hear them through the walls. "He's completely lost it. About an hour ago, he threw Dr. Edwards out of the room. Can you imagine? Dr. Edwards, the head of neonatology, one of the best in the field. He came for the routine night check, but Davis just stood in the doorway like a wall and hissed, 'Another useless torturer in a white coat. You're all worthless. You stab my boy with needles and call it treatment. Get out. I'll handle this myself.' He literally pushed the doctor out. Edwards was white with rage, but what could he do? Peterson ordered everyone to leave Davis alone until morning, not to provoke a bigger scandal. And now he's in there with the baby, alone?" Vera asked, her heart skipping a beat. A cold chill ran through her. "Absolutely," Laura confirmed, stifling a yawn so wide it made her jaw ache. "He locked the door. I heard the bolt click. Said not to disturb him under any circumstances until Dr. Peterson's morning rounds." She hesitated, lowering her voice again. "Honestly, I'm even a little relieved, fewer shouting fits, fewer threats. But I'm scared for the baby. He's so tiny. And the father, the way he grabs him, shakes him. I'm afraid he might hurt him without even realizing it. ChatGPT." She looked at Vera with desperation, searching her face for any trace of support, or even simple human sympathy. "He hasn't eaten anything since yesterday morning," Laura whispered. "I brought him his dinner myself, steak, grilled vegetables, everything exactly as he ordered. He didn't even look at it. Just shoved the table against the wall so hard the plate shattered. Said he wouldn't touch food while his son was suffering. He's only drinking bottled water, one after another. What are we supposed to do? We can't force him to eat, right? The head nurse told us not to interfere, just to record everything in the logbook. Observe and document, she said. Easy for her to say. He loves his son, Vera said quietly, almost automatically. That thought was her only lifeline in this sea of despair. Love must find a way out. It can only destroy. He's obsessed, Laura interrupted with unexpected intensity. That's not love, it's possession. Some kind of rage born from helplessness. He looks at that baby as if it's not a child but a failed project, something that's ruining his entire reputation. This morning he screamed at Dr. Peterson so loudly I think they heard it on the first floor. He threatened to pull all his donations, shut down the clinic, sue every single one of us, even the janitors, for emotional distress. And then, she paused. Then, after Peterson left, he just sat down in a chair, covered his face with his hands and cried. Can you imagine? A man like him, crying, really crying. His shoulders were shaking. I saw it through the glass when I was carrying in 4 to the next room. 5 minutes later he straightened up again, and his face was the same, that mask of steel and fury. Laura fell silent, catching her breath, and only then seemed to truly notice Vera. Why are you still here? Your shift ended long ago. Yes, I'm just leaving, Vera lied, feeling the words catch in her throat. I just wanted to make sure everything's all right. And to take out your trash. She pretended to change the liner in the bin beside the counter to make her lie more believable. Good night, Laura. As good as it can be. Pushing her cart forward, she turned the corner, away from the light of the nurse's station, and stopped in the thick shadow beyond. Her heart was pounding so hard it echoed in her temples. Laura's words painted a terrifying picture. An exhausted, starving, unstable man, locked alone with a screaming infant. Mark's warnings echoed in her mind. He'll crush you and never even notice. Fear washed over her in a cold, sticky wave. She had to leave right now, turn around and walk away, forget all of it. This wasn't her battle. She'd already taken a few steps toward the supply room when she heard soft, measured footsteps behind her. Instinctively, Vera pressed herself into a wall recess, merging with the shadows. A night guard passed by, a large man with a weary face. He stopped right in front of Davis's door, listening to the muffled crying coming from within. He sighed heavily, shook his head, muttered something under his breath and walked on. The scene was so ordinary, so routine, and yet it terrified Vera even more. To everyone else it was just noise, a nuisance to endure until morning. No one realized that behind that door, disaster was brewing. When the guard's footsteps finally faded into the distance, Vera still stood frozen in her shadowed alcove. Then the crying changed. It was a subtle shift in tone, barely perceptible, but Vera's ears, sharpened by days of torment, caught it instantly. The cry was no longer demanding or pained. The anger had vanished. Now it was higher, thinner, laced with trembling, panicked overtones. It was no longer protest. It was the pure, primal scream of terror, the sound of a tiny creature pushed to its final limit. That sound paralyzed Vera. It pierced through her, awakening a memory just as sharp and painful. Suddenly she was no longer in the luxurious corridor of the clinic. She was back in her tiny old room many years ago. Outside, a blizzard raged. The last logs were burning out in the stove. And on the bed, buried in a heap of worn blankets, her little daughter Katia was crying, gasping for breath, choking on her own sobs. Vera had rocked her for hours, but nothing helped. She was alone, desperate, on the verge of madness, certain that the sound would rip her heart to pieces. And then, almost fainting from exhaustion, she had started to sing, quietly, almost soundlessly, an old song her mother used to sing to her. And the child had gone still. The memory seared her, yet filled her with a strange, cold determination. She could no longer leave. Forgetting all caution, she left her cleaning cart by the wall, took a few soundless steps back down the corridor, and, pressing herself against the cold wall, peered through the narrow window in the door of the room. What she saw made her freeze in place, her breath stopping in her throat. The room was huge, more like a suite in a five-star hotel than a hospital ward. But all that luxury, the soft leather furniture, expensive silk curtains, abstract paintings on the walls, now looked absurd and false, a hollow set for the tragedy being played inside. In the dim light of a night lamp, Mr. Davis was pacing from corner to corner. He was no longer the powerful, intimidating man in a perfect suit, only a shadow of him. His shirt was wrinkled, collar open, sleeves rolled up. His hair was disheveled, his unshaven face pale, and beneath his eyes lay dark hollows as though someone had struck him. He moved restlessly around the room, holding his baby son at arm's length, as if afraid to bring him close, as if that small bundle were something burning or toxic. His movements were sharp, erratic. He stumbled like a drunk or a sleepwalker. He muttered to himself, and fragments of words reached Vera, a mad mix of threats, pleas, and promises. "What else? What do you want?" he whispered hoarsely, shaking the bundle in his hands. "I did everything. I brought in the best doctors in the world, they found nothing. You're healthy. You hear me? Perfectly healthy. So why are you crying? What do you want from me?" He stopped in the middle of the room, staring at the baby's tear-streaked face with an expression of total bewilderment, the helplessness of a man used to money and power. "Do you want my company? I'll give it to you. I'll give you everything. I'll transfer all the shares to your name right now. Is that what you want?" Just stop crying, please, son. Please, just be quiet for 5 minutes. I'm begging you. I'll give you anything. His gaze darted to the window where a full moon hung in the sky. Do you want that moon? I'll buy it for you. I'll hire engineers, build a rocket, bring it down here for you. Just tell me how. Please tell me what to do. Then, as if struck by a sudden thought, he froze. Carefully, as if afraid of breaking something fragile, he placed the screaming infant into the glass incubator. The baby screamed even louder, feeling he had been left alone. Davis snatched his phone from the bedside table. Vera could see his trembling fingers fumbling across the screen. Hello, it's me. I don't care that it's 3 in the morning. Listen to me carefully. Find someone, I don't know. A shaman, a witch, a psychic, anyone who can make this stop. I'll pay whatever it takes. Do you understand me? He growled into the receiver and, without waiting for an answer, hurled the phone onto the couch. Then he picked up the baby again. His patience seemed completely gone. The child writhed in his arms, his tiny body tense as a drawn string, his face red and wet with tears and saliva. Then, making another sharp, meaningless turn, Mr. Davis caught his foot on the leg of a low coffee table. For a split second he lost his balance. His body lurched forward. His hands slackened. The bundle with the infant tilted dangerously, almost slipping free. Vera gasped soundlessly, pressing her palm to her mouth to keep from screaming. Horror froze in her eyes. It seemed to her that an eternity had passed before the father, letting out a guttural sound somewhere between a growl and a sob, managed to regain his balance and clutch his son tightly against his chest. That moment became the final drop, the breaking point, for Vera. She saw not anger on Davis's face but a deadly animal fear. He realized that he had just nearly dropped his own child. The realization seemed to drain the last remnants of strength from him. He sank heavily into a deep leather armchair, completely exhausted, and let his head fall back. He no longer rocked the baby, no longer tried to soothe him. He just held the child against his chest, staring blankly at the ceiling while the infant kept screaming into his face. All the fears, all of Mark's cautious warnings, all her hard-earned instinct for self-preservation, they vanished in an instant, burned away by the shock of what she had just seen. Before her were no longer an all-powerful millionaire and his heir, but 2 broken, desperate beings, a father and his son, trapped in a vicious circle of pain and fear, unable to escape it on their own. A moment more and something irreversible could happen. She was no longer Vera the cleaner, the invisible woman with a warning in her personnel file. At that moment she was the only adult in the room. She was a woman who remembered how to break that circle, a mother who remembered how to calm her child. She knew what she had to do. Turning around, she moved quickly down the corridor. Her steps, usually slow and tired, were now silent, firm, and full of purpose. She didn't go back for her cleaning cart. She left it in the shadows, like a discarded snakeskin, a symbol of her old, submissive life. She approached the massive door to the ward, made of dark wood. Her hand froze for a moment above the heavy brass handle. A desperate, cowardly thought flashed in her mind. What am I doing? They won't just fire me, he'll destroy me. He'll sue me for assault, for trespassing. They'll take away everything I don't even have. But then she heard it again, that choking, panicked wail from behind the door, and all her doubts dissolved. There was only that sound and the absolute certainty of what she needed to do. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with air, and pressed down on the handle, gently but firmly. The door gave way with a faint, almost inaudible click. It wasn't locked. He must have forgotten or no longer had the strength to lock it. Vera took a tiny, soundless step inside. The door closed slowly behind her, cutting her off from the safety of the corridor. The air in the room was heavy, stale, filled with the sterile scent of medicine and human despair. Mr. Davis, standing with his back to the door, spun around at the quiet click. His face, half lit in the dim room, looked like a mask of exhaustion. When he saw Vera in her gray uniform, he froze for a moment as if unable to believe his eyes, then his features twisted with rage. "I said no one was to come in here," he hissed, his voice like grinding metal. "Are you deaf or just looking for a reason to get fired? Get out. Now." He took a threatening step toward her, still clutching his crying son. Vera instinctively pressed her back against the door. Her heart was pounding in her throat. Every word she had prepared vanished from her mind. She simply raised one hand, palm outward in a pleading gesture, looking not at him but at the writhing bundle in his arms, and said softly, "Please, sir. 1 minute. Just give me 1 minute." Her voice trembled, but it carried no fear, only deep, genuine pleading. He stopped a few feet away, glaring at her with burning eyes. "A minute for what? To wipe the dust? Or to give me another stupid piece of advice like those useless doctors of yours? I'm not in the mood. Get out." He took another step toward her, and Vera knew she had only seconds. She ignored his angry command. Instead, she did what her heart told her. She closed her eyes and began to hum softly. It wasn't even a song, just a long, quiet melody without words. It flowed from the very depths of her soul, the melody her mother used to sing and before her, her grandmother. The sound was barely audible beneath the baby's desperate wailing, yet it was different. It was warm, alive, and vibrating with something deeply human. Mr. Davis froze mid-step. "What is that? What are you doing?" "Stop that noise," he barked, though his voice no longer carried the same authority. For a brief moment, the infant's crying faltered. He was still sobbing, but the sound had changed, less monotonous now, interrupted by a trembling pause, a sharp inhale, and another cry that no longer echoed with pure despair. Vera slowly opened her eyes and, still humming softly, took a small step forward into the room. She didn't look at Davis. Her whole being was focused on the child. She saw how tense his tiny body was, how tightly his fists were clenched. "Don't come any closer," Davis warned, but his tone had lost its metallic harshness. There was confusion in it now. Vera stopped. She didn't want to frighten him. She only wanted him to let her help. Her melody grew slightly louder, taking on form and rhythm. It was an old lullaby in her native tongue, words that spoke of a quiet river, of sleepy trees along its banks, and of the moon rocking gently in the dark water. She did not move, only stood there and sang, pouring every ounce of tenderness she possessed into each note. And then a miracle happened. The child grew quiet. His crying didn't stop abruptly, it began to melt away, slowly, like snow under the first spring sun. The loud, ragged sobs turned into soft whimpers, then into faint little sighs, and finally, silence, broken only by a tiny hiccup or two. His small body relaxed in his father's arms. The tiny fists unclenched. Mr. Davis stood completely still, afraid even to breathe. He looked from his son to the strange woman in the gray uniform, his face a portrait of disbelief. For the first time in many hours, the room was filled with silence. Heavy, overwhelming silence, broken only by Vera's quiet song and the soft sounds of a baby drifting into sleep. Vera continued singing for a few more minutes until she was certain the child was truly asleep. His breathing became calm and deep. She let the last note fade away, and the silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Davis carefully, as though carrying the most precious treasure, approached the crib and laid his son inside. He stood there for a long moment, leaning over the sleeping child, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. Then he straightened and slowly turned to face Vera. She was still standing by the door, ready to disappear at the slightest word. "How?" he whispered, and the single word cut through the silence like a gunshot. "How did you do that?" Vera only shrugged, not knowing what to say. "It's just an old song, sir," she said softly. "An old song?" Mr. Davis repeated, disbelief in his voice. He spoke in a whisper, as though afraid that a louder sound might shatter the fragile spell that had settled over the room. He took a few steps toward her, and now she could see his face more clearly. The anger was gone, replaced by astonishment and a deep, bone-deep exhaustion. "My son has been sung to by the best specialists I could find," he said slowly. "He's been played recordings of nature sounds, classical music, even some kind of specialized white noise. Nothing worked. And you come in here mumbling something under your breath and he falls asleep. You expect me to believe it's just the song?" Vera felt a flush creep up her cheeks. She lowered her eyes. "I don't know, sir. I saw how hard it was for you. For him too. I only wanted to help. Help? He gave a short, weary laugh, not mocking but drained. You've helped more than this entire clinic with all its expensive equipment and professors. He studied her carefully. Who are you? I've seen you before in the hallway. I'm the cleaner, sir, she murmured. My name is Vera. She still didn't dare look up at him. She waited for the inevitable, for him to come to his senses, get angry again and throw her out on the spot. Vera? He repeated slowly as if tasting the name. At that moment there was a cautious knock at the door. Both of them startled. Mr. Davis shot an irritated glance toward the sound, pressed a finger to his lips and tiptoed to open it. A frightened nurse, Laura, peeked through the crack. Mr. Davis, sir. Is everything all right? The baby stopped crying. We heard the silence and we got worried. Everything is more than all right, he said evenly. For the first time in 3 days my son is asleep. I don't want anyone disturbing him. No one. Do you understand me? Why, yes, of course, sir, the nurse stammered, eyes wide. Her gaze flicked past him and landed on Vera. Confusion flashed across her face. And one more thing, Davis added before closing the door. Call the head of security. Have him bring me this woman's personnel file. He waved vaguely toward Vera. And make sure it's done quietly. He shut the door, leaving Laura bewildered in the corridor. Vera, however, felt her blood run cold. A personnel file. The head of security. This was the end. They'd accuse her of something terrible, of breaking every rule and protocol imaginable. Sir, I didn't mean any harm, she began to stammer, stepping back toward the door in panic. I'll leave right now. You don't need to call anyone. Stay where you are, he ordered. His voice was quiet, but carried the unmistakable tone of authority that allowed no argument. You're not going anywhere. Sit down. He gestured toward a soft chair by the window. Vera didn't dare disobey. She carefully sat down on the edge of the chair, feeling like a trapped mouse. She carefully lowered herself onto the edge of the armchair, feeling like a mouse caught in a trap. Mr. Davis took another chair, placed it directly in front of her, and sat down. For several long, excruciating seconds, he just looked at her in silence, and under that gaze, Vera felt as though she were being examined under a microscope. So, Vera, he finally said, tell me about this song of yours. What language is it? It's the language of my people from my homeland, she answered quietly. And what, every child there falls asleep to this song? His tone carried open skepticism. I don't know about every child, Vera whispered. My grandmother sang it to my mother. My mother sang it to me. They say it soothes the soul. Soothes the soul, he repeated slowly as if the very idea was foreign to him. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Listen, Vera. I'm a pragmatic man. I don't believe in magic or any of that nonsense. There must be a logical explanation. The tone of your voice, some kind of frequency, vibration, something. I don't care what it is. What matters is the result. And the result is currently sleeping peacefully in that crib. He stood and walked to the nursery window, gazing tenderly at his son. I haven't slept in almost 72 hours. I was ready to tear this clinic apart brick by brick. I've spent enough on top specialists to buy a small island, and the solution was mopping floors outside my door the whole time. He turned back to Vera. I don't know what you did, and honestly I don't want to know. But I know one thing, you're not leaving. At least not until my son recovers and comes home. At that moment, the baby stirred in his sleep and whimpered softly. Mr. Davis tensed, his face tightening in fear. Instinctively, Vera jumped from her chair, went to the crib, and began humming the same quiet melody. Instantly, the infant relaxed and drifted back into deep sleep. Vera stood by the crib for a moment longer before stepping back toward her chair, feeling his heavy gaze on her. Mr. Davis was looking at her differently now. His skepticism gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like respect. He sat down again. How much do they pay you here, Vera? He asked bluntly. The question caught her completely off guard. I don't know exactly, sir. I'm paid by the hour with a few shifts a week. I don't need details. I'll pay you 10 times that. No, 20. For every hour you spend here in this room. Your only job is to stay near my son and sing to him whenever necessary. Nothing else concerns you. Do you agree? Vera stared at him, wide-eyed and speechless. 20 times her pay for just sitting and singing? It felt unreal, like a dream. She stayed silent so long that Mr. Davis frowned. Is something wrong? Not enough. Name your price, I'll pay it, he said, his tone turning businesslike again. No, no, sir, she stammered, finally finding her voice. It's more than enough. I can't believe it. I agree. Of course I agree. There was another quiet knock on the door. Mr. Davis rose and opened it. A tall man in a dark suit, the head of security, stood there holding a thin folder. Mr. Davis took it without inviting him in. Wait in the hall. I might need you again, he said curtly, closing the door in the man's face. He walked over to the desk, turned on the lamp, and the warm light illuminated his focused expression and the thin folder in his hands. Vera froze, watching him from her chair. The atmosphere in the room had changed again. Gratitude and awe had given way to cold, analytical scrutiny. He opened the folder and began skimming through the pages with quick, precise movements. Vera, last name? He asked without looking up. My last name is Novak, sir, she almost whispered. Vera Novak, he repeated aloud, finding the right page. Age, late 20s. Widow. No children. Citizenship, foreign. Arrived here 5 years ago on a work visa. No police records. No violations. During her time at the clinic, there was one disciplinary note, for unauthorized interaction with a patient. What was that about? He asked, lifting his sharp, piercing gaze to her. Vera swallowed hard. It was one patient. He was very lonely. I brought him a glass of water and stayed to talk for a few minutes. The head nurse saw me. I see, Davis nodded. His voice carried neither sympathy nor reproach, only a simple statement of fact. He turned another page. Financial situation. A few unpaid loans back in your home country. Otherwise nothing noteworthy. You're a completely ordinary, law-abiding, and very poor person. He shut the folder with a dull thud that made Vera flinch. Good. That makes things simpler. He set the folder aside and fixed his gaze on her again. So, Vera Novak, my offer still stands. But now let's discuss the details, because I'm not merely offering you a job. I am, in essence, buying your time, your abilities, and most importantly, your complete silence. He began pacing slowly across the room, hands clasped behind his back. First, as of this moment, you are no longer an employee of this clinic. Officially, you're dismissed. In practice, you're now employed by me personally. I'll handle all administrative matters. You needn't concern yourself with them. He stopped by the window, looking out at the city lights. Second, you'll live here in the clinic. A neighboring room will be prepared for you with everything you might need. Meals and clothes will be brought to you. You are not to leave these 2 rooms without my direct permission. Vera listened, a growing chill spreading through her chest. The whole arrangement sounded less like employment and more like imprisonment. Third, he continued, you are not to communicate with any clinic staff except the duty nurse assigned to assist you with the child's care. No talking to your former co-workers, no explanations. As far as everyone here is concerned, you've vanished. Mark, Laura, anyone, they no longer know you exist. But, my things, she began timidly. In my room. My assistant will collect your belongings and deliver them here tomorrow morning, he interrupted. You don't need to worry about anything. I'll take care of it all. Your only concern is my son. He stepped closer to her. And fourth, most important, you will sign a non-disclosure agreement. Very detailed, very strict. You will never, under any circumstances, speak of what happens in this room, to anyone. Not about my son, not about me, not about your method. Any violation will result in legal and financial consequences so severe that 10 lifetimes wouldn't be enough to pay them off. Do you understand? Vera nodded slowly. She couldn't find her voice. Excellent, he said, his tone returning to businesslike. Now about payment. I'll transfer an advance equal to your yearly salary at this clinic right now. The rest, after our arrangement ends. All your debts will be cleared by tomorrow morning. You'll never have to think about money again." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times and handed it to her. "This is your bank account number, correct?" The form from her personnel file glowed on the screen. Vera barely managed to recognize the numbers before nodding again. "The funds will arrive within minutes," he said, putting the phone away. "Now I'll call my lawyer. He'll be here in an hour with all the necessary documents. In the meantime, you can rest." He walked to the door that led into the adjoining room and opened it. "This will be your temporary quarters. Make yourself comfortable. If my son wakes up, you know what to do." With that, he left the room, closing the door behind him. Vera remained seated for several minutes, motionless, trying to process everything that had just happened. Then slowly she rose and went to the crib. The baby slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm. She gently touched his tiny hand, and he grasped her finger in his sleep. In that instant, the fear inside her melted away, replaced by a sharp, aching tenderness. She stepped into the adjoining room. It was spacious and luxuriously furnished, with a large, soft bed, a television, and a private bathroom. For her, it might as well have been a palace. She walked to the window. Far below, the city glittered with countless lights, the same city where she had always felt so alone. Now her loneliness was absolute. She was cut off from the entire world, locked in a golden cage. But beside her was a fragile, defenseless being who needed her more than anyone. And that changed everything. The first morning in her new reality was deafeningly quiet. Vera awoke in the enormous bed with its crisp white sheets, and for a moment she thought it had all been a dream. Then she heard the faint breathing from the next room, and remembered. She quickly got up and tiptoed to the baby's bedside. He was still asleep. For the first time she could see his face relaxed, no longer distorted by crying. He was beautiful, tiny, perfect nose, plump cheeks, long dark lashes casting shadows on his skin. Warmth spread through her chest. A soft knock sounded at the door. Vera flinched but then remembered, this was her new world now. She opened the door. On the threshold stood a middle-aged nurse with a cold, impassive face. She was pushing a serving cart. "Good morning. I'm Margaret, your duty nurse," she said in a flat, emotionless tone. "Here's your breakfast. You'll also find everything you need for the baby's morning care. If you require anything else, press the call button. I will come." She spoke while looking somewhere above Vera's head, her tone utterly devoid of warmth, just the precise execution of instructions. "Thank you," Vera said softly. "And Mr. Davis?" "Mr. Davis went home to rest," Margaret replied flatly. "He'll return after lunch. He asked me to inform you that the lawyer will arrive at 10 a.m. and that you are not to leave the room." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Vera with a swirl of mixed emotions. A little later, just as promised, a man in an expensive suit arrived, carrying several large suitcases. Inside were all of her meager belongings from the rented room, though now they seemed pitiful and out of place amid the luxury around her. Her old, faded sweater lay next to the designer robe she'd been given that morning. The contrast was striking. At exactly 10 a.m. the lawyer arrived. He was a thin man, impeccably dressed, with a sharp gaze and a sleek crocodile leather folder. He didn't introduce himself, he simply got straight to business, laying out a thick stack of papers on the table. "This is a standard confidentiality and service agreement," he said dryly, handing her an expensive pen. "Key points. You agree not to disclose any information regarding the Davis family, the health of their child, or your methods of care. The penalty for violation, as you'll see on page 17, is 10 million. He spoke quickly and precisely, and Vera struggled to keep up. 10 million. The number seemed unreal, astronomical, almost fictional. "You may review the document," he added when he noticed her hesitation, "but its contents are not subject to negotiation." Vera took the pen. Her hand trembled slightly. She didn't bother to read it. What would be the point? She was already trapped. The contract merely made it official. She signed where he indicated. The lawyer silently gathered the papers, slipped them back into his folder, gave a curt nod and left. The entire procedure had taken no more than 5 minutes. Now she was officially bound, hands and feet tied. Days began to pass, identical, quiet and seamless, like drops of water merging into one another. Her world shrank to just 2 rooms and a small boy she privately began calling Daniel, since no one had ever told her his real name. She cared for him, changing his diapers, feeding him with bottles that Margaret brought, and, of course, singing. She sang when he fell asleep, when he awoke, when he simply lay there watching the world with his wide, dark eyes. And he was calm. He never again cried that awful, desperate cry. Mr. Davis came every day. He would arrive after lunch, rested, composed, dressed in another flawless suit. He would silently take his seat in the armchair and watch. He never raised his voice, yet his mere presence filled the room with tension. He would look at Vera, then at his son, his eyes reflecting a complex blend of gratitude, suspicion, and something that looked almost like jealousy. He was trying to understand her secret. "This melody," he asked one afternoon as Vera softly lulled the baby to sleep, "is it always the same one?" "No, sir. There are many," she replied softly, still singing. "They're all very old." Another time he pulled out his phone and started recording. "I want to capture this," he said. "Maybe we can synthesize the sound and play it when you're not around." Vera said nothing, but inside, something tightened painfully. To him, she was still just a function, a temporary solution, something to be analyzed, replicated, and discarded once it was no longer needed. The recording didn't work. When he later tried playing it for his awake son, the baby only turned his head restlessly and began to whimper. But the moment Vera approached and began to sing in person, the child calmed instantly. The failure made Mr. Davis furious. He said nothing, but Vera saw his fists clench. He tried to bond with his son himself, awkwardly holding him, rocking him, murmuring something under his breath. But the baby's small body tensed in his arms, fidgeting uneasily. He didn't cry, but Vera could tell he was uncomfortable. Mr. Davis felt it too. He quickly placed the baby back in the crib, then left the room, casting at Vera a heavy, almost hostile look. He, a powerful man who could decide the fate of entire corporations, was powerless before his own child, while some cleaner managed it effortlessly. It humiliated him. One afternoon, while the baby was asleep, Vera stood by the window and looked into the corridor. She saw Mark pushing his cart of tools slowly down the hallway. He stopped in front of their door and stared inside for a few seconds as if hoping to see something. There was worry and confusion in his eyes. Vera desperately wanted to wave at him to signal that she was all right, but she didn't dare. She remembered Mr. Davis's words, "For them, you no longer exist." She stepped back from the window, her heart tightening painfully with loneliness. She was a ghost in this clinic, visible only to one man and one infant. Another week passed. For Vera, it felt like a single endless day contained within 2 rooms. Then one morning Mr. Davis entered unusually early. He wasn't in a business suit this time, but in a simple dark shirt. He looked both tense and exhausted. "My wife is being moved out of intensive care today," he said without preamble. His voice was quiet. "The doctors say her condition has stabilized. She'll be able to see the baby." Vera's heart skipped a beat. His wife. The child's mother. In all this time she had almost forgotten about her, completely absorbed by her care for the baby. Now she was about to meet the woman whose place she had, in a way, taken these past days. That's wonderful news, sir," she said sincerely. "Yes." He nodded, looking at his sleeping son. "She'll be here in an hour. I want everything perfect. Keep doing what you do. The child must be calm when she arrives." It was the strangest order he had ever given her. Vera simply nodded. Within the hour, she changed the baby's diaper, gently wiped his soft skin with a warm damp cloth, and dressed him in a tiny blue outfit Margaret had delivered earlier. The boy began to fuss, but Vera took him in her arms, sat down by the window, and began to hum her gentlest lullaby, the one about the quiet river and the sleepy trees. The door opened. A nurse entered first, followed by a wheelchair slowly rolled into the room. In it sat a young woman, pale and fragile, but with luminous eyes that instantly fixed on the small bundle in Vera's arms. It was Catherine, Mr. Davis's wife. Mr. Davis approached and placed his hand gently on her shoulder, his face filled with boundless tenderness. "Here he is, darling," he said softly. "Our son. He's all right." Catherine smiled, weakly but with genuine happiness. The nurse rolled her closer to Vera. Still humming quietly, Vera began to rise to hand the baby to his mother, but Catherine stopped her with a small gesture. She only looked at her son, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The baby, hearing Vera's voice, cooed contentedly, staring at his little fists. And in that moment, Catherine seemed to truly hear the melody for the first time. Her smile slowly faded. She frowned, not at the child now but at Vera's face. Her gaze grew tense, puzzled. She listened intently, to those familiar, long-forgotten notes that stirred something deep inside her, something buried since early childhood. What is that song?" she whispered. Her voice was frail like the rustle of leaves. Vera fell silent, suddenly uneasy. "It's just a lullaby from my homeland, ma'am," she replied softly, lowering her eyes. But Catherine didn't look away. Her gaze was sharp, piercing. Slowly, she raised a trembling hand and pointed at Vera. "Where did you learn it?" Mr. Davis frowned, sensing that something strange was happening. "Catherine, what's wrong?" "This is Vera. She's been helping me with the baby." "Vera." Catherine said the name differently, not the American way but with the accent of their native language. It sounded the way it hadn't sounded in decades. She leaned forward in her chair, eyes widening with an expression of dawning, impossible realization. "Vera Novak." The ground seemed to shift beneath Vera's feet. She lifted her head and met Catherine's eyes, and in them she saw the reflection of a little girl with dark braids, the one she used to cradle in her arms more than 20 years ago while humming that same lullaby. "Catherine," Vera breathed. It wasn't a question, it was a cry of recognition. The room fell into deafening silence. Mr. Davis glanced between his wife and the woman he'd thought was just a cleaning lady. He saw the blood drain from Catherine's face, the shock, disbelief, and something else he couldn't name. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice growing sharp again. "Do you two know each other?" But neither of them heard him. Catherine stared at Vera, tears streaming down her face. "It can't be you," she whispered in their native tongue. They told me you were dead." Vera began to cry too, lowering her head soundlessly. She was holding her grandson, the child of her lost daughter, and no words could form. All her secrets, her pain, her buried life came crashing down at once. "Mother," Catherine breathed. The word exploded in the silence of the room, shattering Mr. Davis's world to its core. The word mother hung heavy in the air, impossible, undeniable. Mr. Davis froze as if struck by lightning. His mind refused to connect the facts. This woman, Vera Novak, the janitor he'd hired like some strange curiosity to calm his son, the woman he'd locked in a gilded cage and studied with cold fascination, was his wife's mother. His mother-in-law. Absurd. Unthinkable. It destroyed everything he believed about logic, status, and control. "What kind of nonsense is this?" he burst out, his voice hoarse. "Catherine, you're weak. You're delirious." "What mother?" "Your parents died in a car accident when you were a child. We have the documents." Catherine didn't look at him. Her entire world had narrowed to the face of the woman before her. "They weren't my parents," she said quietly, clearly, in their own language. "They adopted me. They told me my real mother died giving birth. They lied." She turned to Vera, her gaze full of the pain of 20 years of abandonment. "You lied." Vera lifted her tear-streaked face. In Catherine's place she saw not a grown woman, but the hurt 5-year-old girl she had left on a stranger's doorstep. "Forgive me," she whispered through her tears. "Katia, my dear, forgive me. I had no choice." "No choice." Catherine's voice trembled with anger. "You had no choice but to abandon me? To leave me with strangers and disappear?" "They weren't strangers, they were good people," Vera cried desperately. "Your father, your real father, died when you were just a baby. I was left with nothing, no money, no work, no home. I starved to feed you. I couldn't give you food or safety or a future. And that family, they couldn't have children. They promised to love you like their own, to give you everything I couldn't. And I was supposed to have a better life in exchange for losing my mother? Catherine asked bitterly. I thought it would be better for you, Vera nearly shouted, her voice cracking. I signed the papers. I promised to disappear forever so I wouldn't ruin your new life. I left the city, then the country. I thought you were happy, that you had everything you deserved. But I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. Mr. Davis listened, not understanding the language, but the tone, the tears, the desperation, said more than words. He was starting to grasp what was happening. He stepped forward and almost snatched the sleeping baby from Vera's arms. She flinched in shock. Enough of this performance, he said coldly, switching to English so everyone could hear. I don't know what kind of act this is, but I won't let you manipulate my wife. You're fired. Security will escort you out in 5 minutes. And remember the non-disclosure agreement. If a single word of this leaves this room, my lawyers will destroy you. No. Catherine cried, trying to rise from her chair. Don't you dare, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, Davis snapped. An imposter shows up pretending. She's not an imposter, Catherine interrupted, her voice breaking. That lullaby, I remember it. I didn't know from where, but I remember it from my earliest childhood. No one but my mother could have known it. She turned back to Vera. Why didn't you try to find me? I wasn't allowed to, Vera said softly, ignoring Davis's threats. I made a promise. But I always knew where you were. I saw your photos in magazines, when you grew up, when you got married. I was proud of you. I came to this city because you lived here. I took the job at this clinic because I knew you would give birth here. I just wanted to be close, to see you even from afar. I never dreamed I'd get to see my grandson. Catherine's heart wavered. Her anger began to dissolve, melting into a deep, aching understanding. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. She had been there all along, a silent shadow watching, loving from afar. And I thought I was all alone, Catherine whispered. At that moment, Mr. Davis looked down at his son, peacefully sleeping in his arms, and suddenly, it all made sense. The strange calm, the inexplicable bond, the song that no science could replicate. The helplessness of the doctors and the magic of the old song. But it wasn't magic, it was the memory of blood. The child, separated from his mother, calmed only at the sound of her mother's voice, the lullaby that connected 3 generations with an invisible thread. All of Martin's pragmatic view of the world, where everything could be bought and explained, crumbled to dust. He looked at Vera and for the first time, saw not a servant, but a woman burdened with deep pain. He saw her sacrifice, her love and her despair, and shame washed over him. Shame for his arrogance, his cruelty for treating her like an object. Slowly, he approached his wife's chair and carefully placed their baby in her arms. Catherine pressed the child to her chest. Then Martin turned to Vera. He was silent for a long time, struggling to find the right words. Forgive me, he finally said. The words sounded strange and difficult in his mouth. Vera, I behaved like a monster. I was blind and deaf. Please forgive me, if you can. Vera looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, only endless exhaustion. She simply nodded in silence. Stay, Catherine whispered, reaching out her hand to her. Please stay with us, Mama. Vera approached, took her daughter's hand and knelt beside her chair. She laid her head on Catherine's knees and began to sob, for the first time in many years, letting her grief, her joy, and her relief flow freely. Catherine stroked her hair gently, holding her son close. Martin stood beside them, looking at his family, real, whole, found again through so much pain. And he realized that it wasn't only his son who was born that day. His own soul had been reborn too. 6 months later. In the spacious, sunlit living room of the Davises' country house, peace reigned. Little Daniel played happily on the soft carpet with his colorful toys, now healthy and cheerful. On the couch nearby sat Catherine and Vera, sorting through an old box of photographs Vera had kept all these years. The faded pictures showed a little Catherine with pigtails, a young Vera, and their modest home in a distant village. They laughed softly as they reminisced. Martin, now simply Martin to everyone, entered the room with 2 cups of tea. He set them on the table, kissed his wife, and smiled warmly at Vera. "Don't tire each other out with all your secrets," he teased gently. Vera no longer lived in fear. She had become a full and beloved member of the family. Her room was next to the nursery, and every night she sang her grandson to sleep with the same lullaby, but now it wasn't an act of despair. It was a ritual of love, one that both Katrin and Martin loved to listen to. Martin had changed. He was softer, calmer, and had learned to value not just financial reports, but quiet family evenings. 2 months ago, he had founded a large charity to support single mothers in difficult life situations. He didn't publicize it, but Vera knew he had done it in her honor. She had found not only her daughter and grandson, but also a son she had never dared to dream of. We don't just tell stories, we remind you that every action has consequences. Subscribe and like if you believe in that, and write in the comments what you would have done in the hero's place.